Hey guys, what's up? It is Ripe again, back with more Neighbors from Hell and revenge stories. In today's title story, OP's crazy neighbor threatens to sue OP for cutting down a tree on his own property. Without wasting any more time, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled, Neighbor Threatens to Sue Me for Cutting Down a Tree on My Own Property. This was just a couple months ago and it has been enough time for me to forget the event, but I thought I would share this with the world to show just how insistent people can be sometimes, even when they are obviously in the wrong. I had a huge tree in my front lawn when I first bought the house. The branches reached over my roof and provided shade for much of my home. It was not an issue at first, but I quickly realized I needed to do something about it when branches constantly fell on my roof and my front lawn during thunderstorms and the winter time. It was a sure hazard and it was only a matter of time before it caused any serious damage to my house and possibly my neighbor's home. My neighbors were not the most pleasant people. They had a lot of complaints and they made themselves known when they had them. They were the kind of people that would make a big fuss if you parked your car on the street in front of them, even if it was perfectly legal. Everyone on the street learned not to mess with them, so when I decided to call a tree removal company, I let them know that there would be trucks and a crane blocking the street in the near future. They nodded and shut the door in my face. I assumed that was notice enough and I would have nothing to worry about. However, I was wrong. The tree removal company arrived on a sunny Saturday morning and within a couple hours the tree was nothing more than a stump. I was glad it got done because they told me the tree was severely decayed on the inside and it was just pure luck on my side that it hadn't fallen down yet. I went to bed happy and relieved that night, thinking I could finally focus on work without any bother. The next morning, I heard a loud knock on my door. I looked through the window and saw my neighbor, face red as a tomato. I will call him Mr. D. He was quite pleasantly spitting at my face, all the while screaming about the cut down tree. It was not long before his wife came and dragged him away. I did not see them again till later in the afternoon. They let me know that they were upset and angry that I cut down the tree without their permission. Apparently me cutting the tree down made them lose the shade over their lawn. Was that really that big of a deal? I reminded them that I let them know beforehand, but they insisted that I never did and I was a rotten liar. I didn't hear from them after that. A couple months went by and the heat was really starting to pick up. We installed all the air conditioners in the house just 3 weeks ago, and at least one is always running during the day. With no AC turned on, the house stays at a whopping 85 degrees indoor temperature. Last year it was at most 80 degrees, but I suppose there are some prices to pay when you lose a tree that provides protection from the sun. My theory was right as I received my electric bill and noticed the cost went up slightly. It was not much, but it was something. It was definitely something though. Mr. D came up to me one day while I was sitting on my front steps. He told me about his plans and how they were not doing their best due to the sun shining on them all day long. He also told me about the electric bill, but that didn't seem as important as his plans, considering he talked about them for 30 minutes. At the end of his speech, he demanded I pay for the damages. Of course I said no. He then told me that he would be suing me for the losses and I should be ready to see him in court. I truly didn't think he was serious at first. No way was anyone that insane enough to sue over someone cutting their own tree down on their own property. The man seemed to think his losses were big enough to win a lawsuit against me. I did nothing and forgot about the issue until I got a letter in the mail. It was a court order letting me know of a court hearing happening in 2 weeks and a bunch of other legal stuff I didn't bother to read thoroughly. I knew the gist of it. The hearing was happening over telephone due to the pandemic. It would be a phone call specifically since there would be more than one person speaking. I called back the tree removal company and asked for any documentation they had and a copy of the permit from the township. They emailed me plenty of evidence I could use. I put together photos of the tree before and after, showing that the entire tree was on my property save for a few branches that reached over my neighbor's side. I faxed everything over to the court a week beforehand. As the days got closer to the hearing date, I started getting stressed out. Work was piling up on me, and the thought of advocating for myself was making me anxious. I sweated bricks all night long the day before the hearing. To make it short, it was not the best time of my life. When the hearing finally started, I had my documents messily strewn about in a sort of organized chaos. I stuttered about 20 times per minute as the judge asked me questions, but even so, I answered correctly and thoroughly. Near the end of it, the judge seemed kind of tired, though the quality of the camera didn't help much. She asked me 3 questions that seemed kind of pointless, like the only purpose of it was to reiterate how dumb my neighbor was to try and sue me, but perhaps that's just my bias. I paraphrase what she said to the best of my abilities. Was the tree that you cut down on your property? Yes. Was any part of the tree touching your neighbor's property? No. Was the tree a threat to your home and did you receive a permit to cut it down? Yes. And with that, the hearing was brought to an end and dismissed. I got a letter days later stating that I did not have to pay the amount my neighbor sued me for, and that was that. End of story. Except, it wasn't the end for me. With all the pain that my neighbors have caused me over the years, I just didn't feel it was right for me to leave it at that and call it a day. I knew my neighbors liked their nights to be peaceful and quiet. They always made an effort to go up to nearby neighbors that were making a bit of noise and yell at them to keep it down, or they would call the police. I took a couple days to get as many of my family members to agree to a little family reunion on a Sunday night. All of my relatives lived in state or nearby, so I invited as many as 20 people for the party. It was not the biggest house party ever, but it was enough to tick off my neighbors. The evening of the party, cars slowly filled up the street, and I let everyone know in advance to park as close to my house as possible. That meant they also parked in front of the neighbor's house. I also made sure to crank up the music as loud as possible. It was not long before Mr. D came over and knocked on my door. I knew it was going to happen eventually, so I took a deep breath and opened the door. Mr. D started up with the usual complaints. He went on about how he and his wife were trying to enjoy dinner with a movie while speaking up with a passive-aggressive tone. I let him finish talking before bringing up the fact that he tried to sue me and wasted my time while I was busy with work. I told him just how inconsiderate he was to take legal action on something that was not even worth all the money they definitely could have used to buy themselves some shade. He knew about the tree being damaged and he knew ahead of time that I was getting it cut. There was no excuse besides trying to start something up out of nothing. I reminded him that it was only 8 PM and that every car on the street was parked in a 100% legal parking spot. I told him to call the police if he wanted to waste his time and shut the door. I watched through the window as he resigned and walked off my lawn. The encounter had left my legs shaking and my heart racing, but it was worth seeing my neighbor defeated for once. Our relationship was probably ruined, but we never saw each other during the day anyway. The party lasted for another 2 hours before my cousins and siblings decided to leave, since their kids had school in the morning, so I went to bed pretty content that night. It's been months since this happened. I have a nice outdoor table where the tree used to be. As much as I wanted to plant a new tree where the old tree was, it just wasn't ideal as the soil was damaged and it would take a lot of effort to remove roots to allow room for a new tree. My front yard may not be the prettiest anymore, but at least my neighbors have stopped bothering me with their petty complaints. And ripe stars, it sounds to me like this kind of neighbor should definitely live in an HOA and maybe even try to become the president of an HOA, because surely he likes to control what other people do. And by the way, I'm curious, have you ever had any neighbors that tried to tell you what to do on your own property? Please let us know in the comments if you have any interesting stories to share. In addition, I would really appreciate it if you could also like the video if you want to support my channel. Thank you so much in advance for your awesome support. Lately we almost always reach 1000 plus likes and I am so grateful for your amazing support. The next one is titled "Stick Me With Your Work, Enjoy Getting Stuck Unemployed." Background: around 8 years ago I applied for a job working for a relatively small organization as a manager. Instead of the position I applied for, they offered me a different job reporting to the person they hired for the management position, still a step up in my career but not quite as good. I accepted the job and soon after was invited out to dinner to meet my new manager, let's call her Sarah. I immediately became skeptical of Sarah. She presented as a devout Christian woman while throwing shade at her previous co-workers and jobs, all of which raised alarms in my mind. I resigned myself to being polite but distant from her rather than running away as fast as I could because I figured I might have the wrong idea about her. But yeah, not so much. As soon as we started working together, she started pawning off much of her work to me. She hated making phone calls which she was required to make, so I got stuck with those. She would not return messages from clients, so I ended up doing that too. The organization was small and had a serious resource shortage, something which was made worse by some recent system changes that were made right around the time we arrived. Her shirking was positioned as delegation since she is dealing with fixing those systems issues. The higher-ups saw it as a temporary issue and implored me to be cooperative. Soon, I was working 60 hours a week trying to keep up with the workload. I got paid overtime, but no amount of money can make up for constantly being thrown under the bus by your incompetent boss because I couldn't handle the workload I was being asked to manage. Nobody could. When she would actually get called on the carpet for mistakes and issues, she would yell and scream at me while simultaneously blaming for the problems she caused. Meanwhile, she was having long conversations with anyone who wandered past her doorway, leaving at 4 every day with no overtime and smiling that self-righteous smile of the oblivious sociopath. I think she truly thought she was a great and successful manager. I will point out that the people in upper management clearly noticed that something was up with the work in our department. A year had passed and things were not getting better. They were actually worse on my end, since now I was so demoralized that I had cried a couple of times at work. Thus, they didn't pay much attention when I pointed out that our workloads were inequitable and that I was basically working both of our jobs, mine and Sarah's, without the appropriate tools since Sarah hadn't actually fixed the system issues she had been hired to manage. Other people in the organization did not really understand the system issues because they never had to use the system. The revenge, I finally decided that I was finished dealing with Sarah and needed to demonstrate the dysfunction to the higher-ups. I waited for Sarah to take a week of vacation and then promptly called in sick for 2 days once she was gone, leaving the higher-ups to try and handle client issues for those 2 days. I did not answer any calls from the office during working hours despite having some frantic "How the hell do I do what the client is asking me to do?" messages. Instead, I waited until after hours, claimed to have been sleeping due to medication, and then left long messages detailing the convoluted processes of how the system worked or didn't. I took the time to work on my resume and write up my resignation letter, including an offer to stay for up to 2 months to facilitate a transition. I didn't bear the lower tiered work I will, and the money would be helpful if I could have a set date in mind, so I felt okay with a longer notice period. I arrived back at work after my illness and had 3 of the higher-ups walk straight into my office, shut the door and sit down. "What the F is going on here?" was the first thing that came tumbling out of the general manager's mouth. So I spent a good 10 minutes detailing the system issues, reminding them that I had consistently mentioned being overworked and not having the tools to do my job, and apparently Sarah, unbeknownst to me, had been bad-mouthing me to all of them, calling me incompetent and slow. Once they told me that, I said I found that surprising since she had spent all of that time bad-mouthing the system to me and calling the management incompetent. One of the other managers told me that they were attributing the problems to me and my emotional state, and now realized after just 2 days of trying to do my job just how awful things really were. They apologized to me for doubting my claims and vowed to make changes. I thanked them and handed them my resignation notice, telling them that I had decided to go back to school to pursue a new career and couldn't do that while working for or with Sarah. Over the next 2 months before I finally left, Sarah basically became a woman defeated. I fed them every nasty word she said for 2 months, including showing them some text messages I received in which she badmouthed the entire organization. The GM told me they couldn't fire her because anyone new would be even worse with the system, but that they were taking steps to cross-train others on the system in order to be able to get rid of her. They monitored her office and interrupted long conversations. They removed me from her control, allowing me to return her delegated work and insist she do it herself. We had long meetings about systems issues during which she was left looking like a bumbling incompetent. After I finally left, they had a little party for me. They called her into the GM's office and read her the riot act for basically chasing me out of the door and costing the organization a strong employee. Their words, not mine. Sarah contacted me after being told off and expressed how sad she was that I would say such things. I denied using the words they claimed I used, saying only that I talked about the circumstances and not the people. I lied purposely in the faint hope that it would be useful to me in the future. I had no great love for the management of the organization despite their recent attempts to make amends, and it cost me little to play both sides. Her reputation was so bad at that point that nobody would believe her if she said I stuck up for her. It wound up being a good instinct. They fired her 3 months later and told her not to use them as a reference. She has basically been stuck in a series of temporary and low-paying jobs ever since she left. We are still social media friends, and I have seen her messages about looking for help from God and tough financial times. As much as I want to feel bad for her, I cannot muster up even a little bit of concern for her. Instead, I enjoyed a little private laugh at every bad thing that seemed to happen to her. Call me a jerk, but I view her as someone who tried to destroy my career to save herself some work. Now onto the cold-blooded pro-revenge. So it has been nearly 8 years, as I said, and I have finally had a chance to truly extract my pound of flesh from her. Last week, she sent me a long email talking about our working together and how she is happy to see that things have gone well for me and how she looks back fondly on our work together. She said she knows that we didn't work together ideally, but that she had few options and wanted to ask me for a professional reference. I jumped at the chance and reassured her that I held her no ill will. Here's my contact info, just have them to get in touch. Anything you want me to emphasize when we talk? I got all the details and told her I would let her know when I got the call. I finally got the call this past Thursday. I proceeded to damn her with as faint praise as I could possibly muster. I really put on the Hollywood touches. Weird vocal inflections, thoughtful pauses before tepid endorsements, seemingly careful and precise word selection. They must have heard from others about her penchant for talkativeness because they have asked me point blank about that too. I went super cagey in my response. I mean, she certainly is friendly enough, but I cannot recall any personal experience with her being distracted from her work by talking too much. Of course, I spend so much time in my office that perhaps I just didn't see it. I got the word this morning thanking me for the reference and saying they hired someone else for the job. I expressed my condolences and told her to feel free to let me know if she needs another reference. She told me she would definitely be in touch. And Ripe Stars, if you have any stories of your own to share about dealing with awful managers or even awful co-workers, then please feel free to share these stories either in the comments or on r/RipeStories on Reddit. And Ripe Stars, with this we have reached the end of the video. However, if you still cannot get enough of my content, then I would highly suggest to check out my endless binge watch playlist, which will soon show up in the left corner of the screen. In addition, I would really appreciate it if you could not only subscribe to the channel, but also turn on the bell notifications, which you can do by clicking on the little bell icon right next to the subscribe button. This will help my channel tremendously, and this will make sure that you don't miss any of my videos. Furthermore, if you want to see additional Ripe content that I don't post on YouTube, then I would suggest to head on over to patreon.com/ripeyoutube for more than 50 exclusive videos that you will not see anywhere else. Thank you so much for your amazing daily support, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.